Good morning, everyone. We are just waiting 1-2 minutes for um, just waiting for some people joining the meeting, the webinar. Yes, people joining, just 1 minute more and we are going to start. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Very welcome to this second webinar from Working Group Environment from Firelogue project. You are more than welcome. This is our second webinar in Working Group Environment from Firelogue project. We are just promoting the dialogue around environmental dimension of integrated wildfire risk management. As I said, this is our second webinar. The first one some weeks ago was around nature conservation and wildfire risk management. First of all, of course, thank you for you being here and participating in this webinar. And also really thanks to the high level of speakers we have today from academia, practitioner point of view, policy arena, and also insurance sector. Basically, I'm not going to go into contents, but basically with this webinar, we would like to explore how to frame nature-based solution concept inside wildfire risk management. In fact, there was a recent publication on good practices increasing the application of nature-based solution in disaster reduction, and there was no example. We will share on the chat. There was no example on in terms of wildfire risk reduction. So from our perspective, the concept is there, but probably still there are many things to explore and for an effective application on that. From my side, I forgot to present myself. I'm Eduard Plana, the coordination of from Forest Science and Technology Center of Catalonia and the coordinator of Working Group Environment. From my side, that's all. And I'm very glad to give the floor to Claudia, the coordinator of Firelogue project, which is giving us an excellent opportunity of promoting this needed dialogue to move forward to integrated wildfire management all across Europe. Thank you for being here, and please, Claudia.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Good morning, everyone, and many thanks also for the invitation and for organizing everything. I think it's really an important activity. Myself, I'm Claudia Berchtold. I'm a senior researcher at the Fraunhofer Institute for Technological Trend Analysis. We conduct research on innovation management in the public sector, and a part of our institute is working also on disaster risk management. So this is slightly my background. I'm here as a coordinator of the Firelogue project, as Eduard already said. And maybe for those of you who are not familiar with the project yet, I would shortly like to introduce it. Firelogue is a coordination and support action that has been funded under the European Green Deal. And the European Green Deal has its own wildfire risk management strand. So the European Union is investing more than 60 million in research funding in 3 very large innovation actions that have between 39 and 50 partner organizations. So they are very large. All of them are covering the entire risk management cycle. And obviously they work on different types of technologies, Earth observation, but also measures, policies, working on response aspects, recovery aspects. So basically, Firelogue has been funded to bring together these projects. So we facilitate on the one hand side the networking between the projects and between the stakeholders in these projects. But of course, also the results are to be synthesized, let's say, or to be integrated across the projects. And one of the main roles of Firelogue is also to develop suggestions towards the policy arena. So we went through 2 workshop cycles, which we just completed in April earlier this year, where we brought together different stakeholders from these projects in order to synthesize the findings. And we do that along five working groups. So one of them is obviously the Environment and Ecology Working Group we are hosted by today. And then we have 4 other ones. One is dealing with aspects on infrastructures, one on civil protection aspects. Then we have the insurance working group, and Joanne is representing also the insurance working group today. And then also the citizen working group. So we try to synthesize the findings along these pillars, if you like, and try also to facilitate the dialogue across these working groups. So yeah, as said, we completed these workshops, and there have been very good discussions about innovation needed in the environment and ecology arena. We have also discussed around nature-based solutions, as Edward mentioned, and now the idea is to discuss with a broader audience, get additional insights, and try to feed also the discussions today, the insights that we will receive through the speakers into these recommendations and suggestions. So yeah, you might hear back from us. And maybe just one last aspect that is important to us is that we did not only facilitate the discussion across the stakeholders on these thematic areas, but is also around justice aspects. So the justice dimension is very important to us, and we try to understand with the measures that are being developed, who does actually benefit by certain measures, who has to pay for certain measures, how are policies developed, which stakeholders are involved, and which stakeholders are maybe also not involved, and what does that mean? So in that sense, as Edward mentioned, nature-based solutions have been discussed a lot over the last months, let's say, but we felt that specifically the wildfire risk management community was not really integrated in these discussions yet. And we had very long discussions already in our first workshop on what is actually a nature-based solution for wildfire risk management. How can it work? How can such solutions be financed? So yeah, I'm more than happy to be here today. I'm really curious to learn more also from the presenters. I'm also curious for potential questions, discussions along the participants. And with that, I would like to hand over to Marta and Juan. So please, thanks a lot for the invitation.
Thank you, both Eduard and Claudia. I'm Juan Picos. I'm coming from University of Vigo, and I have been honored to be part of the moderation along with Marta Serra, and I will try to do my best in keeping things on time and organized in some way. I will ask, there's the agenda. I will try to sum up more or less what is the plan of the webinar today. After these welcoming words, both from the coordinators of the project and us moderators, then we will have 4 presentations of 4 experts with different views and different approaches that I think will be complementary in trying to get this broad issue of these nature-based solutions in wildfire risk management. And afterwards, we will have a panel discussion with all the questions that arise along these 4 presentations. We expect to do a final sum up and closure just to be over around 12 o'clock. So we will try to manage getting things on time. It's important to remark that live webinar is important, but most of the information and also the conclusions of the webinar will be available in the website of the Firelogue project, as well as the first webinar is already there. So probably it makes this event more long-lasting in time than just near the live session. So try to participate, taking that into account, that all these questions and answers and discussion will be available there. Let's go through some remarks from Marta about how concrete is going to be the participation in the chat. Please, Marta.
Yes, thank you, Juan, and Claudia and Eduard. This is Marta Serra from Forest Science and Technology Center of Catalonia, and I will remark just 2 points. The participation of the audience will be through the chat of the Zoom. You can interact there with for asking to the speakers or sharing your thoughts or comments with the other participants from the audience. And we will, Juan and I, we will collect the questions you have during the presentations, and then we will put it on the floor, let's say, in the panel discussion. And the last point is the webinar will be recorded. So for those who don't want to be recorded, you can switch off your cameras. And the webinar will be available on the project website through the YouTube channel Firelogue has. Yes, that's all. The floor is yours, Juan, to start with the presentation's introduction. Thanks.
Thank you, Marta. Now, going to the first speaker, I have the honor and the pleasure to introduce you to Adrián Regos, that in addition to all the scientific things I'm going to tell about him, is also a good friend and almost a neighbor. So it's really a pleasure for me to introduce him. He's working at Forest Science and Technology Center of Catalonia. He's an ecologist. He's specialized in fire ecology, nature conservation, and environmental management. And he has been researching about environmental challenges posed by this global change, focusing especially in the interactions between fire regimes, land use change, and climate warming. Adrián will introduce us about this concept of nature-based solutions and how to apply it in wildfire risk. His presentation is called, as you see in the screen, Mainstreaming Fire-Smartness into Nature-based Solutions Framework. So, Adrián, the floor is yours. Try to stick on time, and then we will have some reflections on your presentation. The floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Juan, for the introduction, and thank you all for inviting me to this to the webinar. I will try to give my view, my perspective on the nature-based solutions to wildfires, and try to provide a kind of a roadmap for first identifying and helping in the implementation of possible nature-based solutions to extreme wildfires. But first of all, I would like to start by setting a little bit the extent. So what is the wildfire problem nowadays? We know that the fire regime or the fire regimes are changing, and some of these changes are leading to more frequent extreme wildfire events that go much beyond the capacity of the firefighters to stop them. Some of them might become really large fires, and also changes in seasonality and even in the extent where the fires can occur. What is the factors that are driving these changes in fire regime? Well, there are different factors. It's very context-specific problem, but overall, we can say that at the global scale, the global scale climate change is the main factor. That is, of course, these more frequent heat waves and longer dry periods are changing the fire regime, and I am making the fire season longer, and also promoting these extreme wildfire events because the vegetation is more stressed and become more flammable. But then at regional scales, there are different factors. It depends again on the context, but in Europe, at least, the rural abandonment is one of the main drivers. Is the loss of these agroforestry activities has increased the field accumulation and continuity, and also in some way the policies, not only land use policies but also fire suppression policies, are in a paradoxical way contributing to this increased wildfire risk. This is because if we stop all fires, if we try to remove fire from our landscapes, at the end, we are contributing as well to an increase in the fuel accumulation and in the available fuel to burn. No? So we need solutions, and we need sustainable solutions. So the framework of the concept of the nature-based solution is getting attention and globally in different sectors to address different challenges, mostly related with climate change and biodiversity loss. It has been defined as those actions to protect and to manage in a sustainable way our ecosystems in order to address a specific challenge, as I said, but at the same time ensuring biodiversity conservation and human well-being. And these three branches are important to understand what is a nature-based solution. Surprisingly, we look at the number of publications, scientific publications in the topic of fire management, and there is quite a large number of papers published every year, more than 1,000 per year. If we look also at the papers on nature-based solutions, we can also see an exponential increase on this topic. But if we try to search papers on nature-based solutions applied to wildfire, the number of papers is still very anecdotal. And this is illustrating also that we are in some way disconnected with this framework and therefore from the potential political and financial support. So here I'm trying to show a roadmap for the identification and implementation of nature-based solutions based on the global standards of the IUCN in order to help policymakers and decision makers to identify those possible solutions and help in the implementation. So the first criterion states that the nature-based solution should address a societal challenge. In the case of wildfires, what is the challenge? Is every kind of fire? Or, well, in my opinion, it's clear that the challenge that we have in this topic are the extreme wildfires, because are those which are totally beyond the current capacity of fire suppression systems, because the extreme fire behavior, this new level of extreme behavior that have, as we know, devastating consequence not only in the ecosystems but in our own lives. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge that fire is a very important ecological process at evolutionary scale. So there are ecosystems, there are plants, different species that require fire to survive. And at the same time, the social component, I mean, the traditional use of fire by the local communities is another important issue, and it should be part of the solution. So the challenge is not the wildfire, it's not the fire itself, it's this extreme wildfires, these changes in fire regime, and fire could be part of the solution. But the second criterion talk about the scale, and this is extremely important when we think about how to implement those solutions. According to this criterion, we should take into account, we are trying to do that, local stakeholders' perspective in the design of the management options. And this should be also taken into account in the umbrella of different legislation and supranational policies, and considering also the multiple sectors that might be affected by wildfires and by the possible solutions. So we expect interactions and conflicts across different sectors and across different policies. And this is, again, a scale-dependent issue that should be taken into account. I had the opportunity to coordinate a project in Portugal where we try to explore a little bit this topic of nature-based solutions. First of all, in the project, which is our study areas in Northwestern Iberia, between Spain and Portugal. And we sent online questionnaires to ask them about what is the current capacity of the firefighters and the different situation, what would be necessary to prevent large fires, or what could be the positive or negative impacts. They give us a very interesting feedback. It seems that they promote the promotion of agricultural and livestock activities is very well accepted, together with forest species changes in forest species composition, or the reintroduction of large fires, in less extent also prescribed burning. These are examples of how this kind of local engagement can help us to identify and also then facilitate the implementation of possible solutions. But we need to take into account, and this is critical for a nature-based solution, the biodiversity and the ecosystem integrity. That means that our solution should be positive, at least in overall. Of course, we expect losers and winners and losers under each strategy, but the solution should be positive for biodiversity. And we know that the changes in fire regimes threaten many species across the globe. Here, for instance, we have some early successional bird species that are mostly threatened by the exclusion of fire in our ecosystems, especially in the context of land abandon, and how the fire can create better conditions and provide habitat for these species. The same might occur for other endemic plant species, such as the Jerez lil in our study area. So there is examples of how fire can help us and can be good for biodiversity. So in our project, what we try to do is assess different potential management scenarios. So we compare a business as usual scenario against alternative options based on promoting agricultural and livestock activities, or conversion from to forest composition, which can be more resistant to fire, or the combination of both options. And we found that in the case of the farmland areas, we'll be providing very much opportunities for suppressing wildfires, and at the same time would be the best options for biodiversity, while keeping more or less constant the climate regulation capacity. So here we identify a win-win situation, a possible solution in terms of the ecological part of the problem. But we need to take into account also the economical dimension, the socio-economical dimension. Well, so in the next studies, we try to put these monetary values on these scenarios to assess how feasible in terms of socioeconomic point of view can be these scenarios. We consider the suppression cost, or the damages on other ecosystem services, or the avoidance damages. And at the end, we found that, again, this option, even though in these areas are not very profitable for the provision, because are marginal mountain areas, but they prevent some large fires and therefore avoid the damages on other ecosystem services. That should be taken into account. And precisely in the criterion 5, it states that this process should be inclusive, transparent, and fair, and should incorporate negotiations and compensations. So backing back to this, our study area, in that case, we should provide some rewards to the landowners for the fire regulation capacity or, and services that their activities are providing us. So it's important, when we think in the implementation of nature-based solutions, try to balance these trade-offs between the primary goal, in that case, reducing wildfire hazard, and the multiple ecosystem services. And in our case, we can see that different scenarios, depending on the study area, we can have positive and negative effects on different ecosystem services. So it's always a trade-off that we need to balance in some way and try to analyze and incorporate. Just to end with the criterion, we need to be proactive but also adaptive, which means that we can identify and try to implement the solution, but then we should be able to monitor and track the impacts of those solutions, to adjust or to learn from this experience and try to improve it. So monitoring is important. We, of course, has a lot of technology nowadays that can allow us to measure how we are affecting with our implementations the post-fire trajectories and the state of the ecosystems. And just finally, in the last criterion, we should consider that we need to work with different sectors and national and policy frameworks. So we need to build this consensus and fostering dialogue, something that we are trying just right now in this webinar. And of course, having some strategic communication and outreach approaches to reach the society and at the different levels. Just the main findings or the main messages is that a nature-based solution should focus on the societal challenge of extreme wildfires. Being fire as a part of the solution, we need to consider possible interactions and conflicts among different sectors and policies. A nature-based solution should ensure the biodiversity, but also the economic viability and these possible trade-offs, and of course the essential part of monitoring and evaluation plans and the integration in a broader legal context. So thank you very much. Just let me say that there is still open special issue around this topic, nature-based solutions to extreme wildfires, until September. So if some of you have some experience, projects, or studies related with these topics, that will be very welcome for the special issue. So thank you. Not sure if.
Yeah. Thank you, Adrián. And we should have just a couple of minutes if there is a very specific and concrete clarification. And if not, and I think it's not, then we are going to go to the next speaker and let the discussion of these very interesting issues that Adrián has raised just for the final debate. So, Marta, the floor is yours just to introduce Kilian.
Thank you, Juan. Yes, the next speaker is Kilian Heil from the Federal Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry Regions and Water Management in Austria. He's a policy officer for natural hazard management and climate change adaptation. He is an expert for strategic planning and technical innovation for torrent and avalanche control, and his work has a special focus on forest fire management. Kilian will share the lessons learned from Austria in applying nature-based solutions linked to the protective forest for other natural hazards. Kilian, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this kind invitation also to contribute to this webinar. Thank you very much also for introducing me, Marta. Welcome everybody. I'm going to share today with you some lessons learned from natural hazards and specifically on the case of protective forests in Austria. Just to set the scene, in Austria we do have around 200 to 300 forest fires per year, which are mostly, like 97%, are smaller than like 1 hectare. But we have a lot of experience with natural hazards, so gravitational hazards. We have more than 7,000 avalanche catchment areas, and we have more than 12,000 torrent catchment areas. We have in Austria more than 2/3 of our area are alpine terrain. And so we have a lot of experience also with natural hazards and also protective forest. And today I just want to give you an insight how we deal with this protective forest and also go a little bit into details. So first and foremost, protective forests are for us a special case of nature-based solutions because they prevent and mitigate natural hazards on slopes, so in the alpine terrain. and they must be managed accordingly. So this is something that I also want to start with. If you don't manage your forest, the protective function will not be a very good one. And we often use it in combination with technical protection measures and spatial planning because we see that it is necessary, and I will illustrate this, to minimize the risk of natural hazards. So for the definition of a protective forest, we see that this protective forest is used very inconsistently. And we think we all agree that forest has different functions. We have a protective function, also recreation. We have it. We use it for timber production, but also for regulation of water quality and quantity. And so if we talk about this protective function, we're talking about the socioeconomic interest, because this protective forest can, on the one side, protect the stand where it is growing, but on the other hand, also the settlement areas. And you see here this graphic where there's the potential forest area in green, and we have different gravitational natural hazards. So snow avalanches, these are the red ones. We have rockfall, the gray areas, and also the debris flows or debris slides. And these can all affect the settlement areas. So this is why the protective forest, like the object protective forest, is so important for us. And here I included a graphic that is from the project Green Risk for Alps. This was an Interreg project done by experts. And on the right, you see also this QR code that leads you to a publication about protective forests for ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, which I think is also quite interesting if you want to know more. And here we see that the definitions of protective or protection forest are very different depending, on the one hand, on the protective function or on the protective effect. So on the top, you see the protective function from left to right for, on the one hand, the site protection or the object protection. So, for example, on the top left, you have this soil protection, which is in orange. The function is that the soil is conserved. And also, for example, in red, the process protection, which protects the stand against the process. And below you have the protective effect. So the areas are more or less the same, but not all the function area is the same like the effect, because the effect also depends, for example, on the trees, on their health of the trees, and also on the health of the whole stand. And on the right-hand side, you have this object protection. So this is the protective forest that protects us against, or that protects the objects like the houses that you see below. And you see that, for example, in the direct protection forest against avalanches, the function is in the whole forest area, but the effect depends on where the trees are healthy and where they really also take this protective effect. So if we apply these definitions to Austria, for example, you see that here Austria has a forested area that is nearly 50% of the whole state. And you see that around 16%, so these are the red ones, the darker red ones, they have a direct objective protective function. And if you see the lighter red ones, they have this object or site protective function. So you see in Austria, there is a lot of protection forest. And this basically also shows the alpine area, or like the share of alpine area in Austria. But to have a settled development, for example, we rely on these protective forests. But the question is, what do we do if, for example, we have natural disturbances? How do we react? And this is one publication that I would really like you to also give a look if you're interested. It's from Wohlgemuth. It's from Switzerland. And they draw this beautiful graph, which I adapted a little bit, because they show the protective function over time after a natural disturbance, for example, a wind throw. And you see that the protection level decreases immediately, and then a little more. And with the beginning of regeneration and rejuvenation, the protection gap can be closed again. And so this is something that I think as a nature-based solution, the forest can do. But especially in this protection gap, we need to make sure also to maybe put more effort into it, and maybe also see the limitation of this just nature-based solution. And this is what I want to illustrate with a few pictures. We have here the municipality in the western part of Austria. You see here a picture from 2019, and this is from a webcam. So we had in October, we had a big storm event, and you see on this picture a rather healthy forest. There are some some gaps or some areas where there's not so much forest in the middle, but it's more or less object protective forest, because you see below the municipality. And then what we had was this wind throw, and you see that large areas of this forest stand are now lose their protective effect. And this is what is especially challenging for us, because now we have to help the forest regenerate and rejuvenate. So if I go back one slide, you see the damage a lot. And so what we do is we help the forest. We leave some of the wood or the debris, and then we help the forest to regenerate, because on these steep slopes with snow and rain, it's not easy for the forest to regenerate. So what you see here is that we need like this collaboration or this link of the nature-based solution of the protective forest, but also some technical measures to help the forest regenerate. And to also give a little insight into the cost effectiveness, we had this report in Austria that looked at the cost effectiveness, and it said that there is like this ratio of 1 to 15 to 146, which means that 1,000 euros for the conservation of a protective forest replaces 150,000 euros of technical protections if the protective forest is no longer there. I think this is a very important number also to keep in mind. And then I want to also give you from the practical side, like this is a policy brief that we drew up 2 years ago from the Alpine Convention that focused on nature-based solutions in the context of natural hazards. And then we had 3 key messages, which I think are quite important, and I wanted to share with you. And this, on the one hand, that we have to look for nature-based solutions in natural hazards on the impact of the natural hazards. So in this study, nature-based solutions that were only improving the environment or increasing the biodiversity were not or the focus was more on the natural hazards. So they should include benefits for biodiversity whenever possible, and also for nature and society. Of course, for the level of protection, they require maintenance. And for the best results, you also should do the safety assessment. So what is the object, for example, that is at risk? And last but not least, also, there's a cost and benefit assessment that you should do for the maintenance costs compared to technical measures. And I know that the time is now still running up, so I'm just going for the last 2 slides, which is the recommendations for implementation. So we heard it before. We need communication strategies to implement those nature-based solutions. We have barriers in legislation and administration, but we need funds. We need those funds to also do these nature-based solutions, especially for forest, protective forest. And we heard it before that the stakeholders' perception is very important. So we need to involve all relevant stakeholders, especially private landowners for the protective forest. And we should also consider nature-based solutions at an early stage of spatial planning, and consider whether the use of nature-based solutions makes sense depending on the circumstances. So I think thank you very much, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kilian. Nice presentation. We have 2 minutes if there is any specific question related to this presentation. Remember that you can propose your questions or comments on the chat, and we kindly invite you to be very proactive. By now, I don't see any questions, so maybe we can jump for the other presentation, for the other speaker. We have a question. How are these protective functions included in the budget at national level, Kilian?
Yes, this is a very good question. So in Austria, we have a specific budget dedicated to protective forest. We have these projects in the torrent and avalanche control, so in my institution, and every year we have around 150 like these projects where we put up technical measures, and like 10% of these projects are for forest, so the rejuvenation and the regeneration of object protective forest. So we have a dedicated budget for this. And is also from the political side is very, like, they really push it. So it's, yeah, we were quite happy from the situation now.
Nice, thanks for the answer. The question was made by Eduard Plana from CTFC. Yes, Juan, if you want to introduce the next speaker, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I want to introduce and to welcome to this session to Joanne Linnerooth-Bayer from the International Institute of Applied System Analysis. She's trained in engineering and economics, and she focuses on global change with a particular interest in risk of extreme events, nature-based solutions for the mitigations, insurance for transferring risk, and inclusive stakeholder engagement. Joanne will introduce us about how can insurance enable nature-based solutions for wildfire. So Joanne, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm giving this presentation on the part of our team at IIASA. You'll see their names here, and also in close collaboration with the Naturans project. So yes, our question is let me go back there. How can insurance enable nature-based solutions for wildfire? And just a little bit of introduction, something that might surprise you, that compared with earthquakes, storms, and floods, global wildfire losses have accounted for the smallest share of economic losses, around 3%, and the highest level of insurance coverage, 63% globally. mainly because fire insurance is in most people's property insurance. However, there are some really large expected gaps, and the largest is expected in Europe, and particularly in the Mediterranean areas of Europe, where there are diverse private and public systems, but none of which explicitly encourage nature-based solutions. So what is a nature-based solution for wildfire? Well, we've heard a lot already, so I don't need to go into much detail, but as a kind of newcomer in the wildfire area, what I've been hearing is the narrative from the ecological forest community, which tells us we need to thin our forests, we need to reduce fuel load with grazing and controlled burns, and of course, we also need mixed forests. On the other side of the coin, there's a bit of another narrative that is emerging from the conservation biodiversity community, which says, yes, thinning, but ecological thinning, where you actually leave the deadwood on the forest floor. Rewilding maybe instead, or maybe in addition to the domestic animals. Cultural controlled burns, which I have in parentheses because there's a lot of debate about this. But if done, then done very carefully, not very infrequently, and maybe along the lines of how the indigenous people actually carried out controlled burns. Again, mixed forests. Outside of the wildland-urban interface, you might think of just letting it burn, because as we heard in earlier presentations, fire is very important for the ecology of the forest, and maybe most importantly, limit development. So that we can allow enough space for these nature-based solutions. Okay, but what we heard, particularly from the last speaker, but overall, is that we need funds to do this. These nature-based solutions with the thinning, et cetera, this is quite costly. And so the elephant in the room really is financing. And this is not only to do with wildfire nature-based solutions, but across the board. And a report by UNEP tells us that climate, biodiversity, and land degradation goals will be out of reach unless investments into nature-based solutions quickly ramp up to very quickly now, to 384 billion a year by 2025, and more than double the current 154 billion a year. So why am I talking about insurance? Well, mainly because one, there's a lot of money in the insurance industry, and there's a lot of power to enable our economies to move towards nature positive investments through two pillars of insurance. One is the underwriting pillar, where worldwide annual premiums are well over 150 billion. That's more than half of the global nature-based solution financing gap. And the investment pillar, much, much bigger. US insurance industry alone has 1.5 trillion in capital, making it one of the largest institutional investors. So what can insurers do? Well, we've identified activities in the underwriting pillar and the investment pillar that can enable nature-based solutions. And those we see I've color-coded it, those in green are consistent with the current insurance business model, meaning they will likely scale up without any intervention. These in yellow have a lot of potential with the current insurance business model, but in my opinion are unlikely to scale up without heavy intervention from either NGOs or government regulation. And those in almost red, pink, we argue needs a completely new business model, and I'll return to that as I move through this. So what I want to do now, the rest of this talk, is give you some examples of these activities, if I can, focusing on wildfire. But the first activity, insure natural capital, actually, I don't have a wildfire example, but there's a very iconic example outside of wildfire, and that's insuring coral reefs. And Swiss Re and WTW, which is Willis, are offering innovative insurance products to insure coral reefs in Mexico, Hawaii, and elsewhere against storm damage. They claim this is the first natural ecosystem to be insured. It's done with what is called a parametric product, which means if wind speeds reach a pre-specified level, this, without checking losses, this triggers a payout, and this is the interesting part of this product, the payout is earmarked to go to pay divers to actually repair the reef. Let's move to second green, and that's de-risk nature-based solutions, where I do have a wildfire example, which is ensuring liability for prescribed burns. And as I said, this is a bit controversial, whether it is a nature-based solution, but one thing we know is that it's risky. And for my example, a prescribed burn by Colorado's Department of Natural Resources destroyed 22 homes and killed 3 persons. 18 million in compensation was paid. Well, you can imagine that this disincentivizes many practitioners, private practitioners even, or public, for prescribed burns. And until recently, there's been no liability insurance for prescribed burns in the US, and I think also Europe. But a new carrier, Forest Specialty Underwriters, along with Lloyd's of London, has recently marketed a product. Okay, enable nature-based solutions financing. And this might be one of the most important things insurers can do. And this involves offsets. And in the UK, it is now mandatory for all major developments requiring planning permission to demonstrate a biodiversity net gain of at least 10%. I've heard it can be even larger. And it will be increasingly important to ensure these offsets against wildfire. And one precedent that we have is ensuring carbon offsets. And in Australia, Descartes insurers are protecting carbon credit offsets with a parametric bushfire product, payout triggered by area burn, utilizing satellite imagery to detect burnt areas and bushfire severity. Okay, now let's move to some yellow. And in this case, incentivize nature-based solutions. And here I'm going to take you to California. First, to illustrate the potential out there to incentivize nature-based solutions with premium reductions. And a study by the Nature Conservancy, along with Willis, showed that ecological forestry, in this case, back to my earlier slide, in this case, thinning and controlled burns, which, by the way, Willis is no longer calling ecological forestry, they're calling forest treatment, because they're starting to recognize that this might not be a nature-based solution. But in California's French Meadows National Park, could lead to a decrease in insurance premiums by a whopping 41% for homes. So you're probably thinking, well, will those residents put pressure on the forest managers to actually carry these out so they get the premium reductions? Okay, this is even more important in California, where the biggest incentive may be just to simply decline insurance for properties in high-risk areas. And in fact, State Farm, which is the largest insurer in California, has announced it will not renew 72,000 policies. And since fire insurance is required for a mortgage, also most often in Europe, this will disincentivize building in high-risk areas, very importantly, unless the government insures, which is actually happening in California, thus freeing land for nature-based solutions. Okay, I'm going to move into a red here. Decline insurance for nature-negative projects. This could be enormously important, but I don't think it's likely to happen very much without huge pressure. I don't have an example from wildfire, but I do have an example from climate, where major insurers have pulled out of the East African crude oil pipeline. This is huge. This is a huge pipeline that will go all the way across Africa. And thus far, 25 banks and 23 insurers have ruled out support for the project. And according to Ugandan law, all major infrastructure projects must be insured from external insurers. This means they are effectively stopping this major infrastructure investment. I mean, and that gives you a sense of the power that insurers have. So now I move over to the investment pillar. Where I'm running out of time for one, but it doesn't matter because I don't have many examples here. But I do want to point out that what we see here, philanthropy, investing in nature-based solutions, and divesting out of nature-negative projects is all part of what is being called ESG investing, where this is the big environment. And there's huge motivation for ESG investing, since nature is increasingly viewed as essential for insurers' long-term viability, what they call financial materiality. Over half of global GDP depends on nature and services it provides. Biodiversity loss could lead to between 1.7 trillion and 3.9 trillion losses each year, according to the World Economic Forum. Compare that with the billions that we need for investing in nature to fill the gap. So you see, there's a great benefit cost ratio here. But despite this strong motivation, we're seeing a lot of pushback. In fact, BlackRock has dropped its ESG approach for transition investing. And BlackRock manages over 10 trillion in assets and was a first mover in ESG. But its CEO has announced a switch to transition investing. I'm short on time, but I would like to read this quote. Maybe you've read it while I'm talking, but I think what's happening is they're moving out of investing in nature, where there's hard to get revenues, and investing basically in renewable energy, because there they can make profits. So what are the big barriers? Well, first, for investment, most nature-based solutions are public goods. In fact, we've been estimating something like 95% of investments have come from the public authorities. And so there's no revenue stream, and they will not then even show up in insurers' portfolios. For divestment, well, then they're insurers, everybody's asking, well, if we're going to divest, tell us, what is nature negative? So the recent EU Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, TNFD, has just recently published its recommendations on how insurers address nature-related risks and opportunities by identifying, assessing, managing, and where appropriate, disclosing nature-related issues. It is the cornerstone of the EU Sustainable Finance Framework. In my opinion, it won't be a game changer unless, one, we make it mandatory, and two, that we actually put strong regulations requiring them not only to disclose, but to actually do it. Okay, I'm finishing up here. What's my time? We've had a working group looking at all these issues. The idea of the working group has been to say, what policy changes do we need to turn these yellow and pinks into green? We've got a few suggestions on the table. I think I just put them quickly up here. These are just a few of some 10 that we've got, but I thought that these were kind of important. One was compulsory adoption of TNFD, which is happening in the UK, require differentiated premiums to reward nature-based solutions, happening in California, extend the European Solidarity Fund to provide subsidized reinsurance to member states that take NVS measures, also being advocated by the World Bank, reform the Solvency II directive to assure that insurance investment policies reflect biodiversity goals of the EU. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne, and for really a great insight in this interface between what we call from the nature sector, what we wish to do, and what is in the marketing, in the insurance world, how it's possible to do and how to do it. So it's really a great approach. And we have, as in previous presenters, a rather brief time just to get some questions. And the first one is just from Eduard, that he asked you, how do you see the premium reduction option in EU context? Is this mechanism used in other natural hazards?
Yeah, not enough. There's some movement in that direction for flood. And in fact, Allianz in Germany is offering premium reductions for taking flood reduction measures in high-risk areas. We did a survey of that. Frankly, insurers don't have a lot of staff to control it. So it's very hard for them to go out and say, we'll give you premium reductions if you do this and that. But in California, they're requiring them to do. And I talked to, we were just recently in Greece, and where we had present in our workshop, the head of the Association of Insurers wildfire insurers in Greece. And we talked about it, said, hey, could you have regulations that required your insurers to do premium reductions? And basically said, we don't do that in Europe. We work in a free market here.
Yeah, there's also another question. I guess we can also raise it up before the discussion. That is from Georgios Sakas. He's saying that prescribed burning, how is the case if prescribed burning burns some houses, and who is paying for the damage?
Yeah.
The insurance company, when these homes are insured, and if not, does prescribed burning may raise to insurance costs, may raise this cost because of this practice?
Well, right now, it's hard to get insurance if you carry out a prescribed burn. And most, I don't know, you out there probably know better than I do. I think most prescribed burns are being carried out by public authorities and probably big forest managers. And who is responsible if it gets out of control? Well, at least in the US, where it has gotten out of control, the responsibility is on the, it was on the Colorado authorities who had to pay this compensation. And I suspect if the private burner goes out, I know that this case came up in Greece, not because of a prescribed burn, but somebody was burning their trash and a big fire, lots of destruction happened. And there's lots of debate on who's responsible.
Okay, thank you. Maybe this question also arises in the discussion. So with any more time, we are going to pass to the fourth presenter, and Marta, we're going to introduce Peter.
Yes, thank you. I will share the screen for Peter's presentation while introduce him. Yes. Here it is. Peter Löffler is a policy officer in the unit responsible for adaptation and resilience to climate change in the European Commission's General Directorate for Climate Action. His main responsibilities are climate adaptation in EU forest biodiversity, nature conservation, and health policies. He works in other services of the Commission, the Environmental Research and Executive Agency, and in European associations for green energy and sustainable urban development. He has an engineering degree in landscape architecture and environmental planning and a PhD in social science. Peter, the floor is yours. You can say me next and I will do it. Thanks.
Wonderful. Many thanks, Marta, for the kind introduction. Thanks for having me. And it's been so far really a wonderful webinar. I learned a lot, and I'm glad we have the other speakers in the room. Now, I'm from the Climate Action Director General of the Commission, but let me maybe just say first that whether we speak of nature-based solutions or wildfire risk management, many different services of the Commission are involved, and we cooperate actually a lot with them on these matters. So it's not just us. What sets us apart maybe from the others, that we have the angle of climate change and climate change adaptation in particular. And on the next slide, speaking of climate change, I don't think, Marta, if I can have the next slide, please. Thank you. This doesn't need a lot of introduction anymore. Temperature records are broken year after year. 2023 was again the warmest year on record. Global and European warming is accelerating. Europe warms faster than the rest of the globe, actually. And depending on the greenhouse gas emissions scenarios, we will have a projected increase in European average temperature by the end of the century of plus 2.5 to up to plus 7 degrees. And these are just average temperatures. So obviously, the climate change has already, and it will continue to do so, has transformed forests and forestry. And the big question is really how much of this forest transformation will happen by disaster, including wildfires, and how much it will happen by design, i.e. under our control and management. And I'm speaking, of course, of forests and forestry, because this is how this is often framed in policy circles. And it is often assumed that the forest community is the main victim and has to deal with wildfires. But of course, it became obvious that this is too narrow a framing. And so it's great to have the other speakers in the room to get the bigger picture. Now, on the next slide, if we just look at EU adaptation policy and the main framework and initiatives which you have in place under that policy, you can see that all our main pillars do have the checkbox on wildfires and nature-based solutions ticked, i.e. both issues, the growing wildfire risks and the need to work with and through nature-based solutions, are largely addressed in the European climate law, the EU adaptation strategy, our climate adapt information platform, and the recent EU climate risk assessment and our recent communication on managing climate risks. On the next slide, let me say a few more words on the EU climate risk assessment, because this has been just come out in March this year. This was done by the European Environment Agency, hence you see their logo on this slide. This was the first ever climate risk assessment looking at Europe as a whole. It's been a fast track exercise, expert-driven and evidence-based. And the quest of this exercise was to identify the big risks per system and across systems that come with climate change. And the EU climate risk assessment also identified priorities for action. On the right, you'll see that the laid out version actually of the final report of this risk assessment is supposed to come out today. And the executive summary was already available in mid-March. On the next slide, you just assessed a quick overview of the main findings of this risk assessment. Overall, the expert identified 36 climate risks for Europe with different degrees of urgencies. Ecosystem is the cluster where you have the biggest risks, the largest number of risks, and also the highest share of risks which are urgent and to be addressed today, really. And you see a number of references to wildfires under this ecosystems cluster, but also interestingly under the health cluster, because wildfires and the smoke which they create are also a significant health hazard. And that brings me already to the next slide, which refers really to the systemic nature of climate-related risks. So a big point of the EU climate risk assessment is that we tend to look at risks as sort of individual from our sector perspective, but in reality, the risks are tail risks. You know, they communicate, they interact, they overlap in space and time. They are not only driven by climate-related drivers, but also by non-climatic risk drivers. And in the case of wildfires, it's of course land use. And climate risk change adds an additional layer of risk, and it works as a risk multiplier. And risks do and can interact in often surprising ways. You know, for a mega drought can lead to water scarcity, to crop losses, to forest fires, to poor air quality, to health impacts, to energy and transport and disruptions, and so on. And the same is true for wildfires. You know, they destroyed crops, infrastructure, buildings, ecosystems. They damage the tourism sector. They cause carbon loss, and there is a price on carbon now. They cause health problems, and so on. So this is how, you know, risks do not work in isolation. They interact and accumulate. So on the next slide, you just summarizing the EU climate risk assessment gave us a strong message. Europe is not really prepared for climate change. Several climate risks are critical, others are already growing. They do threaten major systems upon which our wealth and our societies and our economies are built. Adaptation does make progress, but the impacts outpace it. And so in order to manage risk, we need really faster and more systemic action and all of society, all government effort. And I think this is also very much true for wildfires. On the next slide, you see a reference to the communication which we have put out as a political reaction to the findings of the EU climate risk assessment. The heading is Managing Climate Risks, Protecting People and Prosperity. This communication happens at a period when a new commission is coming in towards the second half of this year. So it really aims to show our readiness to respond to the evolving reality. It's focused on good decision-making and tools. It makes a strong point on the issue of risk ownership and who owns risks and has the agency to act on them. And specifically on forests, it does call again for better forest disturbance prevention and preparedness, with reference to the Union Civil Protection Mechanism specifically. And it also makes a strong point on nature-based solutions as a first adaptation choice wherever possible. Now on the next slide, and these are very full slides, and I'm not going to read all the details of here, but what I want to say here is that in the last few years under the European Green Deal, we have been working a lot on the interface of biodiversity, land management, forestry, agricultural, and climate adaptation policies, also to address wildfire risks and nature-based solutions in a very systemic way. So we have a couple of major EU policy strategies that all address these issues. We have presented a number of legislative initiatives where we think this is needed, including forest monitoring, the nature restoration law, and others. On the next slide, you see reference to the guidance documents that we have been putting out, including one on land-based wildfire prevention, but also on forestry management at large and at national adaptation strategies. Funding and financing has been mentioned a lot, and the needs for that. And here we have been working a lot to integrate adaptation policies, but also nature-based solutions in all major EU funding programs, including the structural investment funds, the recurrent resilience facility, specific programs such as LIFE and Horizon Europe. And interestingly, and this comes back to Joanne's point, we also have we have launched the climate resilience dialogue, where we cooperate with the insurance and banking sector in order to address the issues which Joanne raised and addressed so eloquently. And the last slide in this row, just to continue the circle, is all these sort of several of the main EU initiatives which we have taken to improve our research, knowledge building, and capacity to address, again, nature-based solutions for wildfire risk management. And you can read the slide really for yourself. This concludes the list. So on the last slide, to conclude, let me I showed these three preceding slides to make the point that at the EU level, I think we've got a fairly good and comprehensive framework to address these points. And I think many of these points mirror what already Adrián, Kilian, and Joanne have been presenting. So I'm glad in a way we are on quite on the same page here. Prevention is essential. Land management plays a crucial role. We need a different landscape particularly to address the wildfire risks. Land management is mostly still in the member state domain. So what happens at the level of the EU member states is crucial, and this is, I think, an exchange which we will need to have. That's maybe my first point. I made already the point also that wildfires are beyond forests and forestry. So again, this is a great seminar because it has a wide framing. I made already the point that risks are underestimated. Most climate scenarios are fairly conservative, and at least parts of Europe are absolutely not prepared enough. And a big point, I think, which emerged already in the previous talks, is that nature-based solutions, but also wildfire prevention, lack recognition in the financial risk management and investment sectors. They are cost efficient, they are often really cheap, they're almost a non-brainer really, but still they do not happen enough. Particularly finance is runs at the elephant in the room, and there are major risks, no markets for the benefits, hidden costs of wildfires, but also hidden financial benefits of nature-based wildfire prevention. There are land availability problems, maybe also, and the lack of major bankable good projects that the big financial investors would fund. So something really to be addressed. I think overall the work done by the Firelogue projects and which we've been discussing today is merits to be spread more widely. We will have soon the arrival of a new European Parliament, of a new European Commission. There will be elections in several member states, and I think these are major opportunities to make the points which you've been making and to spread the message. So these are just some foods for some final thoughts. Thank you for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to the exchange now.
Thank you very much, Peter. With this presentation, we can address some specific question. I see someone in the chat. Yes, this Edward Plana asking, could you please explain a bit more how risk ownership concept is described in terms of competences, contribution to risk reduction or increase?
Mm-hmm. The fundamental point is that we didn't have enough of an exchange about who really owns the risk and has the agency or needs to have the agency to react on them. The experience with wildfires and other climate-related disasters is that quite often in land management, for example, land managers engage in strategies that are fairly high risk. The planting of monospecific spruce plantations in the temperate forest zone of Europe, and these forests are at risk from droughts, but they're also at growing risk of wildfires. And they do this for commercial purpose, because in the expectation of reaping the financial benefits. Now, if these financial benefits are privatized, but the risk then means that the forests may go up in flames, and then the national member states and the EU have to come in with public money to bail out the forest owners and the forest-based industry. That is not a sustainable approach. So it comes very much really to who owns the risk and is responsible for it, and who needs to be enabled also to address the risk.
Nice. Perfect. Thank you, Peter. So many thanks for all the presentations and the participation from the audience. Now we will start with the panel discussion. And I see Josep Maria Espelta from Centre for Ecological Research and Forestry Applications wants to address a question to Adrián Regos, but I think maybe is writing right now the question. If not, we can start with a question I have also for Adrián, is what are the boundaries of the nature-based solutions applied for wildfire risk management? Or for Adrián or the other speakers, of course, if you want to replay.
Well, Marta, I'm not sure what you mean by boundaries, but I guess that are intrinsic to the definition of nature-based solution. So to me, one of the main limit is that should be positive for biodiversity. Otherwise, it's not going to be a sustainable solution. But at the same time, to be really implemented in the territory, it should be also social, economically viable. So are the three of these branches, let's say, very important to a real implementation and identification of the most appropriate approach for that specific territory. So I guess that is itself in the definition, in the concept of the nature-based solution, where it's defining clearly, in my opinion, the boundaries.
Thanks, Adrián. Now I saw the question from Josep Maria Espelta from CRIAF is saying, what about the role of the co-occurrence of other risk disturbances? For example, drought. At first, it may increase fire risk, but at the longer run, it may reduce tree density and give rise to more adapted ecosystems.
Yeah, well, I think that in that case, of course, the interaction of drought events and wildfire is very important in some areas, like in Catalonia, of course, because the beginning is facilitating the propagation of wildfires, but obviously even not a drought event by itself, but also a wildfire can see a natural way to the succession to another different state in the ecosystems. So as Peter said, the thing, I think that the issue is to what extent is the wildfires itself will be changing our landscapes, or to what extent we will be able to manage proactively our forests to avoid these extreme events. So to what extent we can control and prevent those situations, preventing or acting to reduce the impact of wildfires or to mitigate the impact. But of course, that is a very tricky issue in these areas where the climate change is affecting vegetation and therefore the fire regime and the response to fire as well, the capacity to recover the ecosystems.
Thanks, Adrián. Juan, do you want to follow with the next
we have
questions?
another question in the chat from Annick, if I'm not wrong. Is directed to Kilian. Could the protective forest in Austria serve as a wildfire risk management purpose as a nature-based solution, besides protection against the other natural hazards you mentioned, or will it be conflicting? Would the forest benefit from controlled burning as nature-based solution?
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to give a little backstory here because I think it's quite interesting also, maybe including some new aspects. I think that we have to prioritize, because we saw in the past that we tried to tell our forest owners to raise the biodiversity, because we were all very scared about losing or decreasing biodiversity. And now all our forest owners, they know, like, yeah, I have to keep all the wood debris and all the stuff in the forest for biodiversity. Now we're coming and tell them, yeah, you have to remove all this wood debris because of forest fire reasons. So on the one hand, you have to take into account, like, the stakeholders, like also Adrián said. I think that, for example, if we also look at this focus, of course, I think that also rejuvenation, for example, in protective forests could benefit from prescribed burning. In Austria, it's not allowed due to the air pollution law, I would say. But I just want to bring in another aspect, which is in Austria, what we see is that we have huge problems with the game, like the deer. And I had one colleague, he told us that in Austria, in the protective forests, climate change is not our problem. We have a much bigger problem, which is the deer, because there is no rejuvenation and we cannot have a healthy forest if there is so much deer. And so I think it's the same with also the forest fires. You have to think about what is the immediate focus that you have to pursue, and then there may be like, what's the priority? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good answer, and there's an important topic here, because we tend to explain from the full water in the glass, just trying to always underline the synergies between these nature-based solutions and these wildfire risk management. But of course, there are some conflictings and some disruptions on that. So I just want to open the floor to the other panelists, just if they also want to reflect how to manage these potential dysfunctions or problems between these objectives, as Kilian said. If it's a matter of space planning, where to do what, or time or priorities, as he said. I don't know if any of you want to go in.
Yeah, I think that yes, it's in the case of fire is an issue. You know, it's very context specific. So the management option that could work in some area might be not the best in other area. No, tree planting could be something positive for climate regulation in some parts in Europe, but it could be not the best option, for instance, in south of Europe. No, it depends on where and how. So I think that is very important planning at large scale or at territorial scale, and try to link as much as possible with the legislation. But there is always these conflicts among sectors in a local or regional scales, but also at the policy level. I guess that is quite difficult to link and try to make the policies as coherent as possible with the different topics that we are facing right now. So I guess that this is indeed one a tricky issue.
I did, just to put you on the debate. But I think Joanne has first her hand raised. Just go there, and then we will pass to Peter. Okay?
Yeah, okay. At the risk of sounding a bit academic, I mean, I think this is a classic multi-objective problem. And actually, at an Institute of Systems Analysis, that's just exactly what we try to look at, the whole system. And you know, it's pretty clear that for climate change, you don't want a lot of wood burning and smoke. It's pretty clear if you're in the urban interface, you don't want big risks to your assets, which speaks against, speaks for, you know, clearing forests, keeping your fuel load down, et cetera. But, you know, I think, you know, what is rearing its head in a very big way, I mean, in a very big way, is, of course, biodiversity. You know, and I know I just heard a statistic in Austria, we've lost 40% of our insects, 40% of our birds. And I heard the same statistic in the US. You know, so it's urgent. We really have to address this problem. So I agree, it's priority setting. I'm coming to my own thoughts that it is a question of pace, how fast you've got to go, and a question of where. I mean, clearly, if you're in the urban wildfire interface, you're going to have different priorities than you're out in the wilderness. But it looks to me like we simply have to have more wilderness. You know, we've got to stop development. We've got to stop growth. And focus there, but that's Joanne putting in her own opinion. So I'll turn it over to Peter.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe echoing on Joanne's point, you know, the way is important. In climate adaptation, we always make the point that you need to have a good risk assessment. And with a good risk assessment, I mean something that extends over time, and you try to anticipate and foresee things. For forest management, and I made the point, you know, what happens at the member state level. Of course, it's got to be context and specific and spatially explicit. We have, I think, about 160 million hectares of forest land in the EU. If we were to change by design, you know, under control, just 1 million hectares per year, which is a huge task, it would cost us 160 years to do that. So invariably, I think some forests will be changed, well, by disaster or by climate change. And there are forests where we can allow that. You know, if there are no human settlements and the risks are small, I think it will invariably happen. So we will need to focus, as John said, on the areas where we can't allow things to get out of hand, and there I think intervention is needed. On intervention, yes, there are trade-offs between different objectives, and that this is, I mean, this is not news in forest management anyway. There are always trade-offs. The interesting thing is that with climate change, the conflict between commercial forest use and commercial interest and biodiversity is this gap is shrinking, because we realize that many of the measures that are biodiversity positive are also measures which de-risk forest management, and hence make commercially sense. You know, having a lot of deadwood on the ground, which is actually humid, is good. Mixed forests in a continuous cover forestry approach are less fire prone. So there are many things where we can get the best of all worlds and keep things on balance. So we in the Commission, we have been pushing a lot for what we call closer to nature forestry, because we think it's sort of one interesting forest management approach which ticks many boxes at the same time. But again, these things will need to be done, planned, and managed also spatially explicit for a specific local context.
Okay, great answers from all of you. I didn't expect more, because you are just really good presenters and experts in the material. I think I have some questions there. I don't know if Mara, you're going to ask them, or we're going to
go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Okay. There is Nikolaos Kalapodis. Sorry if I don't get the surnames very well. He's asking, for all, fire suppression is the primary management response to wildfires in many areas globally. Removing less extreme wildfires, this approach ensures that remaining wildfires burn under more extreme conditions with this suppression bias or paradox. So the suppression bias can have a significant impact on wildfire activity. It alters the natural fire regime and can lead to more intense and destructive wildfires. This effect remains constant regardless of factors such as fuel accumulation, changing fire regimes, or climate change. He's saying that managing wildfires to burn safely in low and moderate severity conditions is there a critical toll in addressing the growing wildfire crisis? And the question is coming in here after the introduction. Can you consider this approach as another nature-based solution in the integrated approach of fire risk management? Could European Union ecologically manage forest and a specific protective one for low-intensity fires that remove accumulate biomass, find fuels? And could this approach increase insurance costs if something goes wrong? So this is the last question has been already addressed after Joanne's presentation, but I think he's asking about this, not only fire use, but this wildfire management when there is propagation in less critical moments or characteristics. So these wildfires that are helping us to avoid bigger wildfires or these extreme wildfire events that Adrián says. And Peter is just raising his hand, so I will pass the floor to him.
No, just very quickly, and this is a very long question, which raises many good points. But just to reiterate, yes, I mean, at the EU level, we are absolutely integrated wildfire risk management includes closer to nature forestry. It includes grazing approaches. It includes prescribed burning. We actually we funded a project called Fire Paradox, which precisely on prescribed burning. However, as I said before, these are things which, for reasons of subsidiarity, we cannot just unilaterally impose, and it doesn't make sense to impose them in a very strict way. We welcome them, but it is up to member states and lower levels of governance to embrace them and implement them.
Thank you. And Joanne has also her hand raised.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is really the really core question of how can we get businesses into this, because we did a lot of interviews on municipalities in Norway. I mean, Norway, one of the richest countries in the world, and found out that the municipalities are really strapped to invest in these nature-based solutions. And if that's the case in Norway, so the big hope is to get businesses involved. And I can tell you, I've been looking into the insurance industry, so I'm not speaking for all business, but I can tell you that there's very big interest in this, in nature-based solutions generally, but also in wildfire, on the part of the big, insurance and insurance brokers. There's reports out from Marsh McLellan, Willis, all the big actors, talking, like 60 pages, making the case of why they should be worried about these risks and why they should be encouraging nature-based solutions. And so it's the talk in the boardrooms, and it's the talk, but it's not trickling down to action, and certainly not trickling down fast enough. I tried to put in my presentation some of the reasons for that. And I won't go over that again, but of course, insurers, just like households like us, they operate under constraints. They can't do everything they would like to do. They've got fiduciary duties, responsibilities, they've got shareholders. And so, as much as they see that they need to do it, as much as I see things I need to do, they can't. And that's why I think we have to really do systemic change. We have to make it possible for them to do this. And in my opinion, it's going to be through strong regulation. I think there's been a lot of hope that it'll be through impact investors. It'll be through, the kind of pressure from their investment community. I think that can go so far, but I don't think it's going to go far enough. And yes, they can do a lot, but we're going to have to act fast on changing the conditions under which they operate.
Thank you. This issue about these fires not to be suppressed if they are not in the critical propagation mode raises lots of also of questions. If there is an owner or a farmer that is seeing the wildfire approach and the forest service says, "No, don't worry, it's not a bad fire. That is going to burn me." So that I think we have to make still a lot of education and also prepare these tools to help those people that will suffer some damage just to avoid the big damage to the rest of society. So I think there's lots of things to be done. Adrián, please.
Well, no, my comment was actually in the same line that yours, Juan, is, but I think that is a very interesting question because, yes, it is the kind of the behavior of these extreme wildfire events making possible to stop them under some extreme fire conditions. So, and as we have been already discussing, it's not possible to manage all the land. So we need to prioritize some areas. Probably the wild and urban interface will need to be more prepared for any potential wildfire to save lives. It's not only about the forests or the properties. It's about our lives, as we can see in different countries that are affected by these big fires. And well, I think that yes, the use of fire, not only planned fire but also unplanned fires, is something that we need to consider in some areas. How we can take advantage of the previous fires for opportunities to stop these big fires is known and is proved in the scientific literature that the previous fires are reducing the probability of having these large events. But at the same time, as you say, Juan, it's very difficult to communicate this to our society. So we have a lot of work to do also in the way we want to communicate. But there is a mismatch clear between the knowledge that we have in terms of fire management or forest management and the perception that the society has around this topic. And we need to close this knowledge gap and try to share these ideas in order to be able also to implement. Because if we have the normative, for instance, and these unplanned fires become possible in the landscape, then the reaction of the society can be very negative. So it should be something in line at the different levels, from in a normative level, but also in a societal level.
Okay, thank you. There has been some activity in the chat. In fact, I will jump one question that Claudia made because Kilian is so good that he's already answered in the chat. So if you want to go there, you will have both the question and the answer, and then I will jump to the next one if it's good for you, so we can try to answer as much as possible. And Eduard is saying that both to to all. Do you see the role of private sector? How do you see the role of the private sector, or they are waiting just for top-down member states or policies and financial tools? How they can become more proactive, since wildfire also may affect and is already affecting businesses. And he's just giving the example of the impact of the tourist sector in Greece or other businesses. And he's just saying that should we look for tools and measures trying to better engage private businesses into the solution, or is it a lost battle? I wish it's not, but he's just wondering if we can just engage this private sector, not just the private owners, that of course, but also those businesses that can be at risk because of these wildfires. So Peter, Joanne, or Kilian, there's some hands raised. I don't know the order, so I will just go for Joanne first and then Peter.
Okay, I'm not sure which hand went up first.
Doesn't matter.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, again, that's the big issue. How can we involve the private sector? I don't think it's an accident that the European Investment Bank came up with a report that I think they came up with 97% of nature-based solutions are funded publicly. I've been talking to them like, who are those 3%? We're having lots and lots of discussions and research on the fact that nature-based solutions have huge benefits, not only primarily maybe to reducing wildfire risk, but across the board. If we take into account all those benefits, society really, really gains. The problem is, of course, this is incredibly important for public authorities carrying out their benefit cost analyses, because they work in the interests of society. For private businesses that work, quite honestly, I'm not pointing my finger at them, for their survival, they have to take account of the fact that they don't do a cost-benefit analysis for society. They do a bottom-line revenue-based analysis. They can't put themselves out of business, and they can't make money on most of these nature-based solutions. Now, there's some that they can, and we really have to explore that, and that's really important. So, of course, I don't think, we're just leaving it alone. We're not getting a lot of private business investing in nature-based solutions. There's a lot of talk about blended models. A lot of blended models are out there, and these are important. And, I think, a kind of a big interest of ours is looking into public utilities and how much they can invest. But most of it comes down in the end to taxpayers paying a big portion of this. And I think we have to accept that. And I think we all have to, open up our wallets as taxpayers and say, we have to invest in nature. It's so important. It's important for us. It's important for our children, our grandchildren. I think, for me, we have to encourage private business. We have to do everything we can, but we have to accept what actually the European Investment Bank is saying, that, the public person is going to have to come in this in a big way through regulation, through taxes, etc.
Great. Now, Peter, please.
Yeah, just a few more thoughts. When I said before, 160 million hectares and transforming 1 million costs. What's the cost of that? Maybe just in planting costs, I guess something like 10 billion euros. That's a big sum. And so where should this money come from? So yes, I guess corporate investment is and at the big financial institutions, that's important. I don't think with EU funding or we're going to sort of make that. But I wanted to add another aspect, and that is really forest ownership. We do have very different forest ownership patterns in Europe, and Portugal is an interesting case here. And I guess that Portugal had these huge fires in 2017, burning about 600,000 hectares, and killing also in excess of 100 people, and it was devastating and caused a governance crisis and all that. And now, and in Portugal, eucalyptus and in proven a highly inflammable tree is very controversial. There are commercial eucalyptus plantations, and we have always been told that the commercial forests are run by companies, by the paper companies themselves, are actually pretty fire resilient because they take good care of them. But then in the aftermath of the 2017 fire, we also presented a case of a province in Portugal which burned, I think, 5 times in the last 40 years or so. And after the 5th time, the province decided we need to do something else, and we need to sort of really engage in landscape management. And the first thing which they realized is that land ownership and forest ownership was totally fragmented, with several thousands of forest owners just on that province, and the province didn't have a proper land register. So however ambitious a policy would be, you cannot implement it because you don't even know who owns what patch of land. If you have with such small patches of land, if you rely just on the willingness of individual forest owners, you get a split incentives problem and a free rider problem. Why should a single owner change forest management if he can benefit from all others doing the right thing? So what I'm getting at here is that there are major implementation problems, and not everything you can solve by just throwing money at it. In addition to creating a land register, that got me wondering, regulation probably will need to come in. It's like in an urban environment. House owners have to comply with fire safety regulations because the collective security in a city depends on every single house owner following the rules. And that's maybe something in such a fragmented forest ownership which is essential. And something like, in a case like, say, Poland, where you've got, I think, 90% of the forests state-owned, that's a different case. And that's also where the tourist sector, if the tourist sector has a problem from wildfires, I think the state forest company can determine, well, this is actually a big public interest issue, which we can address because we own so many of these forests and we have the means to implement a policy. But that's a very different from the Portuguese situation. So once again, different solutions, and as John said, finance, regulation, and all of that needs to come into the picture.
Yeah, that's really a good point. I may add an example from that year, the 2017, that also in the region where I live, there is Galicia. There is not just in the border of Portugal, in the north of Spain. We have the same fires the same days, and there was a car factory. There is a car factory in the city of Vigo that had to stop for 3 days its activity, and stopping a car factory for 3 days is a huge amount of money. And it was not affected by the fires directly, but most of their workers were trying to defend their homes from the wildfire. So because of the workers wouldn't show up in the factory, they had to stop that. So this kind of indirect effects into businesses is what we have to rise up, so they will be more proactive, engaging in helping these fragmented owners just to be more resilient for this crisis of fires. So at the end of the day, they won't stop the car factory for 3 days in case of there is a fire. So these cascade effects that you show a lot in the presentations really is the way of explaining this sometimes far away in their mind businesses from this crisis, how they can be engaged from one day to another in them. Kilian, please, you have to raise hand.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much also to Peter, because he just gave me an idea, maybe something also that I would like to share from a national point of view. In Austria, we have these natural hazard projects that help the municipalities to get more safe living space. And we found, or in our regulations, in our law, it is stated that everybody who gets protection has to pay for it. And in Austria, there is the government, and then there are also the municipalities who do this financing process together. But we found out that if you form communities, so these are, they have also some legal background. If you form communities that get the protection and you involve them in the financing process, the projects are much more likely to be successful. Because of course we have also this scattered land ownership. We have very small forest, or the people that possess the forest, they have like very small areas. But if they are together in a community, they they have more ownership for the project, and also the financing instrument proved very beneficial for us. So I think including the people that are affected also for financing could be an option.
Thank you. Yes, there's a hand by Joanne. Please, Joanne.
Yeah, I would just really like to follow up on Kilian's point here. The one thing I didn't mention that we're doing a lot of work on is community insurance. And why is community insurance important, especially for nature-based solutions, is that if we look at wildfire, most of the nature-based solutions are not done at the household level, but they're done out in, sort of a public or big forest owners or so on, they're collective measures. And there is precedent in insurers actually encouraging or supporting these collective measures for flood risk in the US, where you can join a program from the National Flood Insurance Program, community joins, you take certain measures on the community scale. And if you take these measures, you get points for them, and the more points you get, the more the residents in your community get deductions or discounts on their insurance. And that's really interesting because the residents start putting pressure on their public authorities to do it. And so, we've been thinking hard about that, on how you could bring these kind of community schemes into wildfire. And I hope, Kilian, we can follow up and talk about that more.
Okay. I will just excuse me, because I've some moments ago I told about a question made in the chat and answering the chat, but it was just in the panelist chat. So I will just try to go back to this question that Claudia made to Kilian. And she said, you have shown the cost effectiveness of nature-based solution over structural measures. Are there mechanisms in place to require the use of nature-based solutions as a preferential measure, at least in case of public investment? And then I will ask just Kilian to do some sum up of his answer in this chat that I mentioned, and most of you don't see. So just I will raise it again.
Yes, I will just also copy the question and the answer in the general chat. But just one or two sentences. Of course, we have this cost-benefit analysis, which has to show that the measurements that we are taking are have a bigger value than the damage. And what you also have to keep in mind, especially for nature-based solutions, in our experience, they need maintenance. They need a lot of maintenance, and it might be cheaper, but you need the people who do it. And so, for example, if I put up a structural mitigation measure, like an avalanche defense structure, something like that, I build it once and it costs a lot of money, and then I maybe have to do some little maintenance after 50 years or something. But for the nature-based solutions, they don't cost a lot of money immediately, but you need a lot of maintenance, and I think this is the challenge in this aspect. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, and excuse me again for the mistake. And there are a couple of very good questions now in the chat, at least in the list that I am seeing. And the first one is from Eduard. There is and probably it's Peter. Sorry.
Juan, sorry. Maybe we can jump to the question from Joanne Rambold directly.
Okay. I will go, please.
Okay, is from the Agency of Nature and Forest of the Flemish government in Belgium, and he's saying, Current discussions about wildfires often refer to solutions in natural environments where fire has always been an essential part of the ecosystem. Preventive burning is often presented as the miracle solution. However, in temperate regions, there are many ecosystems in which fire does not belong, but due to extreme weather conditions and major drought periods, people will be confronted with wildfires. How do you look to it? Do we need to introduce the use of fire, or do we need to look for and maximize the implementation of other solutions to preserve the current ecosystems as much as possible, not knowing how they will evolve in the future under continued climate change pressure? And I think it's for all of you. Peter, yes, please. You are muted, Peter.
I never learn it, will I? I think overall with climate risk management, and I think specifically also for forests, we have a great degree of uncertainty. No one knows exactly how forests are going to develop and how the forests of the future are going to look like. What we can say is that forests have started to transform, and they will morph into something different. This uncertainty and also the risks mean that we will need to experiment also a lot, and we'll need to engage in strategies where we try and test many approaches. I think diversity of solutions is important because no one's got the final answer. And any solution should ideally be sort of a no-regret measure that works under any climate scenario, something which is relatively risk-free. I think that's just a general observation. That doesn't answer the question whether you should start with prescribed burning in Flanders right now. And it seems to be a fairly sort of extreme measure for, yes, a country which is in the temperate forest zone right now and which hasn't experienced a huge forest fire the way Portugal experienced it, in the past. Having said that, there needs to be some public outreach also about changes to moral forest management, people are starting to plant different trees now in Belgium. That also needs to be introduced to the public. So it doesn't really quite answer the question of whether prescribed burning is necessary now. I think a risk assessment of Flanders would show when this may be needed, but overall that forests will change and that this needs to be communicated. I think that's out of question for me.
Thank you, Peter, for your answer. As we are 2 minutes left before the closing of the webinar, we will give the floor to Eduard and Claudia to do the sum up and closure. Eduard, Claudia, the floor is yours.
Well, I guess that Claudia also can join us for this last minutes. In fact, obviously our intention is not doing a kind of concluding comment. It's impossible. There was a lot of content. I think that I'm very happy, and we are very happy as organizer about the complementary, about the views. I think was very nice, Adrián, having from your side this conceptualization of the concept in terms of wildfire risk management. Kilian, a lot of thanks also for helping us, wildfire community, to learn about your experience in having nature-based solutions in these protective forests. Joanne, probably yours is the most difficult role because, as Juan said, wildfire community normally, or risk management community, at least wildfire community, and foresters especially, are not really used to these amazing aspects on insurance and this double role that you perfectly explained. I see there a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities, and obviously Peter always helping us to understand how this landscape of policies are evolving. It seems that hope as fast as climate change is evolving, because at the end it's also a governance and a big policy challenge to accelerate all these needed changes. And we know perfectly that things that are on the policies needs time also to downscale, arrive to the member states, arrive to the regions, etc. Maybe it's impossible, as I say, to make a concluding remark, but I think that concept, Peter, about risk ownership is crucial. I think that nature-based solutions and is also offering the chance of giving visibility that I put on the chat, that protective function ownership. So just trying to see in the other side, in the sense of how to give visibility to those who are contributing to the risk reduction, and probably in many of your interventions and in the chat, we saw still gaps there overall in making practical tools for these things happen in each of the fields that you explore. So once more, thank you very much. Thank you for all the participants for your proactive participation on the chat. Still, there are some questions were open, but as we said, we are going to prepare a summary report. You will have available maybe Marta, you can share once more in the chat the web page of the webinar. You will find the presentations, the video, and a summary report. Claudia, sorry, I cannot see you. Yes, please.
I'm here.
just last words.
Yeah,
nothing
to add really, because you did a wonderful summary, Edward. Thanks a lot really to the speakers, and I think it's amazing how really every time you learn more. Although, you know, we had 2 workshop cycles, we had really encompassing discussions, and I'm really happy, not only personally to have learned again, but I think it really complements the discussions that we had, and it will also complement the conclusions that we can draw, the recommendations or suggestions we can make towards the policy domain. So I think in that sense, it was really enriching, and I'm already looking forward to processing that further. So thanks a lot to the speakers, to the attendees, and looking forward to continue the discussions. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Lucía, ¿me oyes? Yo no te digo a ti.
Finalizamos grabación, ¿no?
Sí, pon stop.
Finalizamos.